Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Jumper from 2008. So, I immediately just enjoy this film, even when really looking at it, you're just watching a vacation movie, is really what happens. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, wait, there's a war going on that you didn't even know about. And now it's the mad scramble to just like choose a side and pick a weapon and battle it out. It is kind of bizarre, but like when really looking at it, there needed to be something to eventually go somewhere in this movie. You can't just have a whole entire thing about David's character just enjoying every day as a vacation. Like, I'm sure there probably is that kind of film out there, but still, like we have like a travel channel kind of a movie. But for David here, we have this character that was to not have the best home life, and because his mother at some point was to run away from David and his father. And so David doesn't really have much of any friends, any real support system, anything like that. So David one day decides that once realizing he has this ability to be anywhere that he wants, he then decides to run away from home and is to go on and start robbing from banks, and then eventually at some point is going to get caught for doing this. So David then has to go on and partner up with Griffin to then take out these Palatins. And here's the thing about this story that I immediately realized when watching this film. I'm like, who technically is the real villain here? Because when really looking at it, both of these characters, both Palatins and Jumpers, both do crimes. But with the Palatins, it's like, well, I guess they end up doing the worst crime, which is to try and wipe out the Jumpers, try to kill them off. As well as the Palatins are to be seen as these kind of, this bureau division, as these authority figures. And when really looking at it, we have the Jumpers that are just trying to live a life of fun, trying to be guys that are to, of course, be off the grid. And I guess as a possible society, we might not like a person who is to kind of live their life of freedom, and we want to take that freedom away. That could be really the inner thought of this whole movie, of just like, oh, well, hey, you're having fun for your whole life? No, 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 no. We need to just we need to snuff that out. You can't have a life of fun. No. You have to be miserable, and you have to do this, you have to do that. It's kind of like going on and finding and seeing all those like rich people that have more money than God, and they just decided, it's like, well, hey, like, I don't like need or want for anything, so I'm just gonna go on, just kind of like completely just sit on this money. And like, that's great and all, but it's also just like, like, come on. Anyways, so I like this movie, and really when like coming down with it this time around, or coming through it this time around, I start to see some, like, in my brain, like, I start to think about this movie a lot more, because I think for this film, it's one of those where you would kind of take your brain out of it and just kind of drop it off to the side and just kind of enjoy the adventure, because really that's what this movie provides, is a real fun adventure. So where could you go out of your way to say that you can see this movie? Currently, right now, to the second's recording, this movie is available on Cinemax, but I will also give you a free way to say that you can see this movie. So going on to two apps that are through a Google search. You can search the word letter C movies, which is a letter and then a word. Go ahead and download that app once you find it through a Google search engine. And then you should be able to see brand new releases, premium access stuff, items that you would dare say go out of your way into certain apps just to be able to see, like HBO Max content or Stars content and stuff like that. So, also, there's another app called Fox HD Movies where if you go and you search these words, you should be fine to find this app because there, in fact, the logo will say Fox HD Movies, but the title will say something different. It'll say Play 1080p HD Movies. And then also you can go onto a Google Play Store and search the word TV Crush. And you'll find an app that has the words HD Movies on the logo, and then you'll have like this little crown off to the side. So go ahead and download that app, and you may be able to see Jumper, not quite sure, but either way, you can be able to say that you can see a number of movies for absolutely free. So go ahead and check that out, because without a doubt, check out Jumper. It's a fun movie. Like, I would say that this movie is to be, like, it's probably like a solid okay movie, or like I would maybe tiptoe my way into a good film, or it just being a good film. Um, really, there isn't a lot of like character development with this movie, because really it pushes a lot of this guy just kind of plopping from place to place to place, and then finding out like what like he wants to go back and try to uh, make his life happy or happier, and then all of a sudden this war happens, then this battle happens, and like and action as we go throughout this film. So with that said, let's go on and let's go into the spoilers of Jumper. Let's go into that double 5 time territory because it's about that time yet again. Just going to spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we can do spoil this movie. So, adjust a little bit. I was like, brr. So, we have, of course, David in the beginning of this film, who is on the Sphinx Pyramid. Funny enough, it seems that they could not actually have a person be on the Sphinx Pyramid for this film, so they had to kind of creatively figure out a way to have this item consistently in the film, but they couldn't have David actually like sitting on this thing. Or maybe at some points in the film they had to go on and like edit this or go and have like a replica being done, or because they couldn't actually do it, which I thought was really interesting that I kind of found out. It's like, well, yeah, like it's a it's like a real legit like thing that like they're like very worried about the structure of this item, so it makes a lot of sense to just go on and be like, no, like we're not just gonna have anybody just come into this film and just stand on this thing and maybe like it'll be unstable or might get ruined. We're not sure. So anyways, David is to be on this Sphinx pyramid, and he's going on and eating this meal. And so David, of course, is to mention that he was to go on to Poland, and he was to like meet this girl, and he was to go on to these like several different locations, and so he's going to tell you how exactly he did all that. So flashback to David now going through what I would assume would be high school. David, it seems that he is to tell us that his mother, who is Mary, had run off on this family when David was 5 years old. And so now David, of course, lives with his father, William, who was played by Michael Rooker. And, like, yeah, like, the one thing that I was so impressed by this movie is really just the cast list. I'm like, man, when looking at every single one of these characters in this film, like, even, like, small roles, we just go on and be like, oh my god, like, Kirsten Stewart's in this movie. Or, like, we go on and we have, like, Jamie Bell that goes on and becomes, like Ben Grimm in the Fan Four Stick movie, which I don't know how well received that movie really was, but still, like, we have that guy who is to go on and do a number of things here. So we have David that is to go on, and it seems that he's really infatuated with, of course, Millie here, who is to have all over her locker all these places that she always wants to go to: Paris, Rome, this and that. So David is to be interested in this girl so much so that he decides one day to give Millie a gift of this snow globe that he says it's like, well, like, the snow globe's kind of missing a step, but, like, hey, like I just found this thing for you. And Millie's like, oh my god, this is great. And so all of a sudden we have a bully coming in, I believe his name is Mark, that is to take the snow globe and chuck it into the Ann Arbor River. So we have David that goes on and he decides to go after this snow globe right as we have David, who is now basically walking on ice trying to get this item. We have David that gets the snow globe and he thinks that everything is fine. All of a sudden he falls through this river and is now drowning. All of a sudden David is to appear in this library, this Ann Arbor library, and he, of course, is to realize, oh my god, like, I can teleport, I can jump, like, this is great. So David at some points is to try and figure out his power, see how exactly he can do this. If it's all just a picture or if it's all just, like, in his brain. So we get to one point where we have David who is to see the Empire State Building because he is to have this memory of David and his mother Mary going to the Empire State Building. And so all of a sudden David is there, and so he's spending a day in New York City, and he's in Central Park trying to figure out how his power works, how he can go on and, like, teleport from certain locations in Central Park, which is kind of interesting. So we have David who is to, like, experiment and try to figure out this power. And so we, of course, have David having a father that is very difficult to live with. And when David is to come home from being in the library, and he, of course, was to have drowned, when David, of course, was to make his way into the home, all of a sudden William is to realize that that David, of course, is tracking water into the house. And so William's like, well, hey, like, go ahead and mop this up. Like, come on. And so David just kind of runs off into his room, and William's like, hey, like, do the right thing, kid. Do the right... So David just goes into his room and runs off. And so we have this odd thing where we have David's like door that is like chained up and has this like lock on it and all this stuff um from not David, but like this door is to be locked from the like the outside, not the inside. So that's what I kind of thought was so like interesting. So David is to go on, and he decides that he's going to like he luckily has enough money together to run off to this hotel. And we have this hotel owner that is telling David, it's like, hey, no weird stuff. What do you mean by weird stuff? Like, does weird stuff mean like, hey, don't go on and like and become a drug dealer, or don't go on and like have a brothel in my place, or like, what do you mean by weird stuff? Like, can you define that? Is there a dictionary somewhere where it's like, don't do any of these things? Oh, okay, all right. No, that's like, don't do any weird stuff. Okay, so David goes on to this apartment, and really this is like the like when you walk in, like there's like a room that is to be like this guy's entire place. I'm like, does this guy even have a bathroom? 'Cause it just feels like he has like a door, a uh, a bed, and like that's it really. Like it doesn't really seem like he has like anything other than that. And maybe like there's a public restroom or public bathroom that everyone shares. I don't know. I don't really get the setup of this place. So we have David that is decide to start thumbing through all these pictures, and that's when we get to him like seeing uh, all these spots. And so at one point we have David going and investigating this bank, and we have David going to ask this person about like, well, hey, can I go on and use your guys' restroom? So David, of course, uses the restroom, and then is to see the opening of this vault. And so David, of course, waits till nightfall, goes into this vault, is to steal all of the money in this vault. Which I'm like, isn't that kind of convenient that they just like laid all that stuff just right then and there for David to just take? Like, I can't believe that all of this is just right out in the open, but I don't know, maybe I don't know much about banks or vaults or whatever. So we have David taking all of this money, but then he realizes that he doesn't have a big enough like bag to take all of this stuff. So like I think he ends up having to like grab this like sheet and this bed sheet and like grab all this money and chucks it all back into this place. And so now we have his landlord or his super or whatever that goes to, of course, see or realize like hear David is doing something that like it's these loud noises or whatever. And so we have the landlord that is telling like David, hey, like, what did I say about weird stuff? How did the guy know he was doing really anything weird? So we have David deciding to just like, well, hey, like I'm just gonna move on. I'm just gonna go and like definitely get out of uh, this apartment and go on to bigger and better things. So we have Roland's character, who is played by Samuel Jackson, who is to start to get these cases with this bank robbery that they can't quite explain. So Roland is now realizing that it seems that David is to have all these IOU notes, and is to say that I guess David was to think here that he was going to eventually pay this all off at some point. So we go into this story, and David is now living in this like very lavish hotel. Has a whole room that is completely stacked to the brim of money, and we have it where David is living the lime life, living the high life, and he is to consistently go on and has learned to surf, and is to go on and seek out the best waves, and wherever like is to have like the most like fun waves to go on. And because we had David who was to ask one of these surfers, it's like, well, hey, like I thought that this location like was to give us some storm to like have the best waves, and the surfer's like, oh no, like the storm turned and it's now in this location. And so David's like, oh, okay, thanks. So like David went on to just teleport to that location, because of course he is to seemingly have like teleporting locations all over the place. So David at one point is to leave from his like hotel to go on to teleport to London, where it seems that he is to have some fun while going on and standing like right on the Winchester, or the let me say this correctly, the Westminster clock tower. And luckily I've kind of had to see this before, because I've seen like London Has Fallen, or I've seen a lot of movies where eventually you have like London being put in the film, and immediately when they have London being put in the film, like usually the standout thing is usually to have like the clock tower being shown through most of these movies, or most of the London movies, which I always think is really great. So we have David that is spending some time in London, and we have David in this pub that is to meet this random girl. And so David is to teleport in right next to this girl and is starting to talk with her. And we notice some guy in the background who we'll find out is Griffin, that is to realize what David is doing, realizing that he's a jumper. And Griffin here is to really just laugh at the fact that this guy is such a rookie and he has no clue what he's really doing. So after David is to seemingly bed this London girl, it seems that David is to finally realize that like eventually his like he has to have real meaning. Like he can't just be like going from girl to girl to girl and like have all this fun. But really David always wanted this one girl, and it's always been a thing that he just can't get out of his head, that really David sees Millie as his first possible love. And so all of a sudden we finally have this all come to a head, and Roland is to finally find David within his hotel location. after David, of course, to make it back, after talking to this one security guard, well, like, well, hey, how did the game do? And that the guy was like, well, hey, I guess you didn't really need that umbrella. And David's like, yeah, I guess I didn't. Like, you're right about that, even though he technically did, because he was, of course, teleporting to London. So David makes it back to his place to realize that Roland is waiting for him. And so Roland is to bust out all these IOUs and all these notes, and really having Roland telling David here that the jig is finally up, that all like the freedoms that you have taken and whatever are all like come due. So David is trying to now teleport his way to try to get away from Roland, but Roland is to seem to have a number of weapons here that are to come on and to try and grab and try to restrain David from using his jumping ability, because these weapons are to electrify David, and that of course it's kind of like a shock collar where like it has the person like have this inability to do what they're going to try to do, which is try to evade or try to escape, or like it's kind of like an electric fence in a way, where a dog would probably just be like, well, I'm just going to try to get out of here, and all of a sudden do it, and then they would decide like, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. So it's kind of the same thing here. So David is desperately trying to figure out how to get away from Roland, and fortunately he does. David figures out how to teleport within inside this room, where now Roland has to figure out exactly where he is because he can hear him. And so Roland is trying to desperately break down this wall to try to get to David, and David goes on and is to teleport back to his old home. And William is still living there. So William is telling David, it's like, well, hey, like, I don't know if I'm crazy or not, but like, but David, like, you still have a home here. Like, you still, like, just, like, come home whenever you like. Like, you're always welcomed here. Because we have Roland that is to realize that David is to make his way back to his hometown. And so Roland goes on to speak with William and is to ask if William has seen David. And William is to mention that he hasn't seen David in like 8 years. And then Roland brings up Mary, which is William's wife. And William tells Roland, is like, well, I haven't seen her since my kid was 5. So, like, if you're going to ask me who either of these people are, or anything, like, I have no answers for you. And so Roland is like, well, if you do, like, you'll let me know. Even though Roland kind of turns, is like, well, like, but like, if I tell you that, you're not gonna let me know now, are you? And William's like, well, no. So Roland is to go on and kill William. And so when David does return back to his house, to his place, to see his father dead, David goes and teleports his father to this hospital, and they're trying to scrambling to revive him, but it seems that, sadly enough, David's dad is dead. David's dad dies, sadly enough, in this movie. So it makes sense, because kind of technically, like, I don't think David is going to go back home anyways, so it's just kind of a thing that just is to be an inevitable, a kind of thing to just kind of like, hey, those Palatines killed my father kind of thing, and so now I have to seek revenge. So David goes on and is to, like, since he's, like, back home, we have David go to this local bar, which I guess is Millie's bar, and David is really tempted to want to talk to Millie. And it seems that he took 45 minutes to just continue to stare at her to figure out, it was like, is that Millie? Like, so all of a sudden David is to want to leave this bar, and all of a sudden he bumps right back into his old bully, Mark. And so it seems that Mark is to have uh, this kind of rice bowl or some kind of goofy name for David, and David's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't know this David guy. And all of a sudden we have Millie come into, like, the frame here, and it's like, oh, hey, David. And then all of a sudden David is then David. And so David is talking to Millie, they're catching up, and like, Millie was to also know that David has been, like, staring at her for 45 minutes and wanting to possibly say something. So all of a sudden Mark is wanting to go on and have Millie get him a beer so he can kind of catch up with David here. And Millie, of course, is to kind of shove Mark, and all of a sudden there's, like, a fight that breaks out. David is to grab Mark and is to kind of shove him off to teleport him into this bank vault, where then David goes back into the bar to continue to talk to Millie. And so Millie and David are catching up, and so Millie is to ask David, it's like, well, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing for work? And David is to mention that he's banking, and that he's in banking. And so Millie's like, well, wait a minute, didn't you, like, fail algebra? And David is just like, well, yeah, so what? So, like, he's in banking, so what? So David is saying that things are going so well with his job that he's deciding to eventually go off and go on a vacation soon. And Millie's like, well, where's that? And David is like, well, just Rome. And Millie's like, oh, so you're just going to go off and just go to Rome? Like, David's like, yeah, sounds about right. So Millie, of course, is telling David, it's like, well, you know, that's, like, the one spot that I've always ever wanted to go. And David's like, well, hey, like, come with me. Like, if you want to go, like, then come with me. So Millie and David decide to go to Rome. And so they go on, they make it to Rome. And so, like, the first thing, they kind of, like, adventure around and see all the sights. But the main thing is for them to go to the Colosseum, because they got to case the Colosseums. I got that joke, honestly, from the show Scrubs, because there was this one episode where I don't remember the girl's name, but she would go on and, like, she would try to cure everybody by flashing people, because she was some doctor. And so there's this one time where like, they were trying to fake this one guy's death, and or, like, no, there was one time where this guy was making this joke about that he had the case of the Gottaceums. I got a case of the Gottaceums. And so all of a sudden, like, I remember that joke, and from, like, now on, like, if there's ever a time where I can have, like, a joke where I mention about the like, I got a case of the Colosseums. Anyways, that's the origin of that joke. So we have David and we have Millie go on to Rome, and they go to this Colosseum. And so by the time that David and Millie get there, and Griffin is weirdly just following along, mentioning that David is such a rookie. So David and Millie make it to the Coliseum, and unfortunately the police officers there are letting David know that technically the Coliseum is closed for the day. So we go on, and Millie's like, oh, that's too bad that we like came here as this place is closing. So all of a sudden David is to go on and be like, well, you know what, like I'm not gonna let this like ruin our fun. So David then goes on is to use his ability to open one of these doors that are closed. And so David is to tell Mary or Millie that like, hey, like I opened this door, like this door is open, let's come on in. And Millie's like, well, wait a minute, this guy just told us that this place was closed. And David's like, well, come on, like this door is open. So all of a sudden we have them look at the Coliseum and, oh my God, this is so great. And David is like, well, like there seems to be another door where we can go on and kind of further see more into this Coliseum. And Millie's like, well, it looks like this door is telling us that like no further, like don't go any further. And David is saying, it's like, well, if you actually read this sign, it says like welcome all. And so Millie's like, I don't think so. And so David is like, well, just give me a second to go all the way around and I can open this door for you. And Millie's like, oh, this again? So David goes and is to use his power to try to open this door. But all of a sudden, we have Griffin off to the side just peeing, whizzing, going on and giving the big leak. So now David is to give, or Griffin is to give David the 411 here, or the information. So Griffin is telling David, it's like, God, you were so, like, you're such a rookie and you have no clue what's going on. And David's like, well, what do you mean? And Griffin's like, well, like, there's a war going on. Like, if anything, like, I'm not here to kind of, like, to, like, ruin your day, but it seems like these Paladin guys are. So, all of a sudden, we have these two Paladin guys that are coming in. And so we have Griffin that has this, like, baseball bat that keeps teleporting and smacking these guys. And so now both David and both Griffin are having to fight both these guys off using their powers of evasion. So David and Griffin are to go on, and both of them are to really just try and escape here. And David is to try to eventually avoid Griffin from having Millie find out what's really going on. And so now David is scrambling to get to Millie to try to get out of this Coliseum. And so now David and Millie, like Millie's like, what's going on? What's going on? And David's like, well, you're right. Like I went into a place that I should not have, and I didn't realize it. Like I didn't realize we couldn't go through into this place further. Like I'm sorry. So both David and Millie are trying to make it out of this Coliseum, and all of a sudden these Rome authorities are to see both David and see both Millie here, and so they arrest David for like trespassing and going into that place, but also like I'm sure David is like a very wanted man now. So David is telling Millie like hey, this girl like isn't with me, and David is telling Millie like just kind of go back to the hotel and everything will be fine. So David is now in this Roman police station, just kind of waiting for someone to come in here. And so they're taking David's passport, and like they're just kind of waiting for like a Paladin to come in. All of a sudden we have Mary, who just kind of comes out of nowhere and is to give David back his passport and is to tell him to get out of here because he has 20 seconds before someone's going to come back in here and try to stop him. So remember, like Mary is basically Samuel Jackson's character. That Mary is to be David's mother, but Mary also is to be on the opposite end of any jumper. So Mary should go on and have to kill David, but Mary, of course, was to realize a number of years ago that she was either to kill off David or run away from him and protect him. And so that's what Mary just chose in the end, was to protect her child and run away from him instead of killing him. So, but here's the thing though, like we should have had Mary like leave a note or something, just say like, "Hey, hey David, like I realized that you were a jumper when you were this year old, and so with that power comes great responsibility and also great knowledge for you to know that like people are going to try to kill you at some point. So maybe you should just try to avoid like just out and about just using your power to just go on and be so flashy about it." Like I think also David was to like overly use his power. Like we have at one point where David is to be on this couch and he realizes like the remote is on the opposite end of the couch, and so David just teleports to be closer to the remote. So I'm just like, really, like what a like lazy piece of like. If anything, we should honestly like. It doesn't make sense for any jumper to have like six pack abs and like be this like muscular looking person. Like if anything, like all jumpers should be these like fat slobs of characters. Sadly, because it, like it would make a lot of sense. Like these characters don't have to go on and really like do like much of anything if that's what they really wanted to. Like we had one moment where Griffin is just kind of walking around and David is telling Griffin, it's like, well, like seriously, like you're walking, like why are you walking? Like we can go on and just kind of like jump anywhere. And Griffin is like, well, no, like I like to walk, like I like to just be able to just kind of be like everyone else, like we don't have to jump everywhere. So but anyways, so David is to scramble out of this Roman jail. And we also had the moment that I kind of forgot about where Millie is trying to go on and put all of these clothes in this closet that she can barely reach. And so all of a sudden David and Millie are to go on into this bedroom scene to kiss one another because we find out that these two really like one another. So once David is to make it out of this jail, or out of this police station, excuse me, he is to go on and try to make it back to speak with Millie. And so David is telling Millie like, hey, like I gotta have you go on and go back so that way you can be protected. So to go on back to Ann Arbor. So Millie is to ask David, it's like, well, you know, or is to tell David, like, you know, though, like before when I used to say that I didn't want to, like, I didn't really need to know anything about you, David. Like, well, now I think it's about that time that I need to know. So all of a sudden, David is to showcase to Millie that he is to have this whole backpack full of money. So Millie, of course, is say it's like, well, David, you're really probably not a real banker, are you? And David's like, well, technically, I get my money from banks. And Millie's like, oh my god, so you're a bank robber? And David's like, well, something like that. So Millie's just like, oh my god. And so David is to tell Millie that he can no longer be with Millie like go on this plane, and like so like this is gonna be the last time he sees Millie is on this plane. But then David at some point is gonna go on and try and kind of see her make off this flight, but Millie's flight was delayed. Or no. Millie's flight was to have already been uh like she had gotten off of it like I think like an hour or two ago, and so David kind of misses Millie uh coming from Rome. So David is to go on and find Griffin. And so now David is to talk to Griffin consistently about putting together a Marvel team up. Where David is to ask Griffin, it's like, well, do you know about the Marvel team up, right? And Griffin is like, well, yeah, like you have two guys together for a very limited time. And David's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. Is to just have this kind of like us getting together to go up against these Palatins, hopefully wiping them out, and then kind of us going our separate ways. So David and Griffin are to, of course, go on and have this plan together. And so David is to follow Griffin to his hideout, and because David is to go through Griffin's uh, his teleport scar, and because I guess there is some kind of after effect of these guys going and teleporting, and so it seems that not only both David and Griffin, like David can kind of walk through somebody who has already teleported and go to the same place they did, but also we can find out that Roland, with a number of his people, can get this certain kind of equipment to be able to do the exact same thing. So we have David and we have Griffin, and so David is consistently asking Griffin, like, well, hey, like, we need to team up, like, we need to group together, like, and so David and Griffin, like, David keeps asking him, and so we have David and we have Griffin, where Griffin is to just like steal this car and just drive all over town and have like Griffin just kind of like having this car like fly in the air and just kind of like easily get through all of this traffic. And so now David is asking Griffin, it's like, well, wait a minute, like, how can you go and jump this car with you? And Griffin is like, well, like, I can jump anything as long as I'm touching it. So Griffin is to mention that there was one guy once that tried to jump a house with him, and come to find out that this house was to kill the guy when he like jumped with it. And so like that guy didn't exactly live to tell the tale. So really showing us that at some point we're going to have someone try to go on and do the same thing. So at some point both Griffin and David are together, and so they go on to eventually try to go where Millie's like plane had supposedly gotten off. And so David realizes that Millie isn't there now because like her plane was like hours to have gotten back. So now we have David that is to make his way to Millie's place. And so David like sneaks into Millie's place, and Millie's like why are you here? And David is telling Millie like, well, I just wanted to be sure that you were okay. And Millie's like, well, so you snuck into my place to do so? And David's like, well, yeah, I get how it looks, but still, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. So all of a sudden, we have David that is to realize that the Palatins are to try to come and take Millie here and try and go on and uh, like try to use her as a way to get to David. So we have David that grabs Millie and is to have to now tell her that he is a jumper. So he goes on and is to take this girl's snow globe and is to show her that he can jump so that way he can take her and have her jump to Griffin's hideout. Because Griffin was saying that he was going to get some equipment together and then David and Griffin are going to meet at his hideout. Because when David is to go to Griffin's hideout, we find out that there is this Paladin that's been there that David has been questioning. And at some point, we have Griffin who is to go and dump this Paladin in this ocean somewhere. So like Griffin has this like ability to go on and see like and be able to kind of like dump people wherever. So we have Griffin and we have David that are back at this hideout with Millie, and Griffin is now like upset with David of like, well, wait a minute, like, why is it that she's here now? Because really, we have Mary and we have Griffin telling David the same thing, that it's like you need to lose this girl because like she's gonna get caught in the crossfire and she's probably gonna get killed. So, but David wants to protect Millie, and so what ends up happening here is that Roland figures out that David and Griffin were to teleport. And so they get all this equipment together and they spray into Millie's house and realize that there is a scar that they can jump into, which all of a sudden means now Roland can go where Griffin's hideout is. So now we have this really cool fight out between both Griffin and Roland, which leads to Griffin all of a sudden like teleporting these like this big massive bus to try to chuck right at Roland, where Roland is kind of like dodging out of the way or jumping out of the way, and like Griffin is like grabbing all these items to chuck at Roland, where he's like dodging and ducking and diving all these things. So as well as also we have like Griffin who's like flame throwing, um, like flamethrowering. I don't know what the right word is here. Griffin is to have a flamethrower, and he is using this weapon against a number of these Paladins to try and kill them all off. So, and David and Griffin are kind of going and hiding out at the beginning of this while Roland is making his way through. And so David, of course, is to notice this picture that Griffin is to have of David's mother. And so David is to see the picture of this mother, and that's what all of a sudden starts out this action sequence where now like Griffin and David are fighting off these Paladins, and we consistently have it where David is to like have the Paladins like hit him with this weapon to kind of disable him or to kind of like keep him stuck onto this wall, where Millie has to then come in there and kind of kind of break him free. And so now Millie is telling David, it's like, well, hey, like if I help you, like you gotta get me back to my house. And or you gotta get me back home. Because Millie is to go on out of this like hideout and realize that she's basically on an island. And so Millie's like, well, I want to get out of here. So all of a sudden we find out that the Palatins are trying to grab Millie and retrieve her back to her place. And now Griffin is wanting to put a bomb into this location, and because Griffin is to take the equipment that's in the other is in like Millie's place and grab the equipment so they can't go on and make their way to Griffin's hideout. But before Griffin is to do that, they grab Millie, and so David's like, well, we have to go back to help her. And Griffin's like, well, no, like, I'm just gonna go on and I'm gonna put this bomb and have it go off and kill off all these people, and like sacrifices have to be made. And so David's like, well, no, like, so both David and Griffin are like teleporting all over the place, fighting over this detonator and this bomb that's in this safe. And so like here's like a really cool action sequence between David and Griffin that is kind of all over the place. Like it's like in Egypt, it's in Chechnya, and like it's all over, like everywhere, like Washington and all these kind of places that either one of them had at one point teleported, like Yellowstone Bridge and all this stuff. So David and Griffin are fighting, and so Griffin is to have the detonator. David is to have the detonator. And so really this leads to them being in some war zone in Chechnya, and like bullets are flying, tanks are driving over cars, and all this craziness is happening. And so we have David that is to go on and jump and have Griffin being put into this this electrical or this electrified kind of tower of sorts that holds like electricity and whatever. So Griffin is now like stuck being consistently electrified, and now David is like realizing that Griffin can't teleport, he's just kind of stuck. And so now David is like, well, like we can't go on and we can't do this. So like you're just gonna get stuck here, and I'm just gonna turn around and save the day. So David then goes on and is to make his way back to Millie's place, where immediately when he goes in there, we have a bunch of Palatins that have this trap that's sprung for him, because Miley is stuck to this wall, and then David is now stuck to be attached to this whole entire room that they're in. So David, while getting electrocuted, is to decide that, like, well, I'm just going to jump this whole entire room that I'm in. And Roland is telling David, it's like, well, like, there's some things that, like, should not be jumped, should not be, like, attempted. And so David goes on and is to teleport this whole entire room in Ann Arbor, the river. And so it seems like a number of people are all kind of caught off guard, and some of the Palatins end up drowning in the process. And so then David and Millie are to teleport back to this library where like now Roland is to try to get to David and Millie, and both David and Millie teleport to this other uh, section of this library. So we have Roland that's just kind of applauding David's effort and thinking that this guy was a lot smarter than he gave him credit for. So now we have both David and Roland having to duke it out here. And so David decides to teleport Roland to this location that is in this mountain. And there, of course, is no way for Roland to get out of this location. Because, of course, Roland is to have to, like, really figure out how to climb his way out of here because he's just kind of in the middle of nowhere. So, and then David is like, well, like, you know what? I could have dropped you in the ocean with sharks. Like, I could have figured out a place that could have killed you, but no, like, I'm just going to have you go on and be stuck on this mountain forever and, like, see how you can get out of there. So, really, David is to make his way back to eventually go on and be with Millie and realize that they have won, that it seems like they've wiped out all the other Palatins, that it seems like there is a real threat here. So, really, we focus on the end of this movie just really being that David, to of course, want to speak with his mother. And so, as David is to make his way to speak with his mother, he finds out that Mary had gone on to, like, have a whole nother family. And we go on and we have David, who's just kind of at a loss because he was like, what? Like you have a whole nother family. And Mary's like, well, yeah, of course. Like, I had to run away from you because it was either the choice of me killing you or me having to, like, run away from you. And so that's what I chose. So, because Mary used to have a daughter. So Mary before was trying to tell, or was telling David that when he was in this Roman police station, that Mary was going to give him a head start. And so David, now speaking with Mary here, David again is just like, well, like, I'm a jumper and you're a Palatine, and how is this ever really going to work? And Mary goes on, it's like, well, like, how it's going to work is that I'm going to give you a head start. And so we have David that goes on and leaves this place, and I'm assuming that Griffin is fine now. Like, I'm assuming that Griffin probably got out of his little trap that he had, and he's probably fine jumping along somewhere. So both David and both Millie are to go on and get out of this cold environment to have both Millie and David jump to this place that's a lot warmer. So they both teleport out of there, and that's just how the movie finishes up and is to finish off. So with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. This review is probably far too long, but oh well. At the end of the day, I'm just going to get the heck out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.